The morning had barely started when the old music academy opened its tall wooden doors, letting in the familiar smell of polished floors and warm sunlight. Most days were quiet at this hour, filled only with the soft footsteps of teachers arriving early, or the gentle echoes of someone practicing scales in a distant room. But today felt different. Something small and unexpected was about to stir inside the academy, something no one had prepared for. A cleaning woman walked through the hall, carrying her worn-out bag of supplies. By her side walked her young son, a boy with curious eyes who looked around like he had entered a secret world. He wasn't supposed to be there, but she had no one to leave him with that morning, so she brought him along, hoping he would sit quietly while she worked. He agreed, but the moment he stepped inside and saw the grand piano standing in the middle of the hall, he forgot everything else. The piano was huge, dark, and polished so well that it almost reflected the ceiling lights like a mirror. It wasn't just any instrument. It was the heart of the academy, the one students feared playing, yet dreamed of touching. The boy stared at it the way a hungry traveler stares at water in the desert. He couldn't help it. Something about the piano felt alive to him. His mother didn't notice at first. She was already busy setting out her things, preparing to sweep the long corridor and dust the railings. But the boy slowly walked away from her, eyes fixed only on the piano. His steps were silent, almost shy. It felt as if the piano was silently calling him closer, asking him to come touch the keys just once. A sudden voice broke the calmness of the hall. "Hey, what are you doing here, kid?" The boy froze. Standing near the door was the academy director, a tall man with a strict face and a coat that never had a wrinkle out of place. He walked like someone who always expected people to get out of his way. Behind him were a few staff members, ready for another long day. The mother turned around immediately and rushed to pull her son back. "I'm so sorry," she said in a soft voice. "He won't touch anything, sir. He's just waiting here while I work." The director raised an eyebrow, looking from the mother to the boy and then at the piano. "This is not a playground," he said sharply. The boy lowered his head, but his eyes were still on the piano, unable to look away. The director noticed that and let out a small laugh, shaking his head as if the whole situation was a joke. "Don't tell me he thinks he can play it," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. A few of the staff members laughed with him. The mother felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. She tried to put her hand on her son's shoulder and guide him away, but then the boy did something unexpected. He looked up and asked, in the softest voice, "Can I touch it? Just once?" The hallway fell silent. Even though he spoke gently, his question cut through the air. The director stared at him, stunned that he even had the courage to ask, "You?" The director said, laughing again, "Touch that piano?" The boy nodded. He didn't step forward or make a bold move. He simply stood there with honesty written across his face, as if the piano meant something to him no one else could understand. The director waved his hand dismissively. "That piano costs more than your mother's entire salary for a year." The mother's face turned red again. She whispered a warning to her son to stay quiet, but it was too late. The boy's eyes were still glued to the piano, and the director could see it. "You know what?" the director said suddenly, folding his arms and leaning back slightly. "If that boy can play anything worth hearing, I'll resign my job right here." He smirked proudly, and the people standing behind him chuckled again. The mother begged him not to take the boy's words seriously, saying the child didn't know anything about expensive instruments. But the director had already moved on, thinking the matter was settled. However, something shifted in the air. A music instructor who had been walking by overheard the conversation. She wasn't the type to laugh just because everyone else did. She looked at the boy carefully, noticing something different in his expression. Most kids who saw the grand piano were either intimidated by it or excited, because they thought it looked fancy. But this boy's gaze was quiet, almost emotional. It was the look of someone who saw the piano not as a decoration, but as a friend. "Let him try," the instructor said, stepping forward calmly. The director turned toward her with a frown. "There's no need to entertain this." "Why not?" she asked, shrugging lightly. "It's just one moment. He touches the keys, nothing happens, and the day goes on." Her voice was so simple and reasonable that even the director found it hard to argue. The boy looked up at her like she had just opened a door he'd been waiting his whole life to walk through. The mother looked worried, but the instructor gave her a gentle smile, as if to say it would be okay. The director finally sighed in annoyance. "Fine, let's get this over with. Everyone seems to think it's such a harmless idea." He lifted his hand to the staff behind him. "Make some space. Let the boy sit." The boy's heart was suddenly pounding in his chest. His mother whispered to him not to embarrass himself, but he barely heard her. His feet carried him forward slowly, almost floating, until he reached the piano bench. His hands shook a little as he sat down. The bench felt too big. The keys looked too perfect. He took a slow breath, trying to calm the strange excitement inside him. The entire hall had changed. Teachers stopped walking. A few students peeked from doorways. People who didn't even know what was happening paused when they noticed the crowd forming. The big joke the director made just a minute ago suddenly felt heavier, as if the room was waiting for something important. The boy placed his small fingers above the keys but didn't touch them yet. His hands hovered just an inch above, feeling the cold air rising from the smooth ivory surfaces. The room's silence grew deeper. No one laughed now. No one spoke. Even the director, who still believed this was a pointless moment, couldn't help watching quietly. The boy closed his eyes. Something inside him settled, like he had been waiting for this moment longer than anyone ever knew. His mother held her breath. The instructor who supported him gave a tiny nod, encouraging him without words. He took one more breath, then his fingers moved. But the moment before they touched the keys, just that tiny second felt like the world paused. The entire hall stood still, unaware that the smallest sound he was about to create would change everything. The boy didn't know that the director's laughter would soon vanish. He didn't know that the people in the hall would stop seeing him as just a cleaner's child. He didn't know he was about to reveal something inside him that even he didn't fully understand. All he knew was that, for the first time in his life, he wasn't just looking at a piano. He was finally touching it, and as his fingers gently landed on the keys, the air in the grand hall shifted again, as if holding its breath for whatever sound would come next. The moment the boy's fingers touched the piano keys, a strange kind of quiet wrapped around the entire hall. It wasn't the usual silence that comes after people stop talking. This one felt deeper, like the whole room was waiting to see what would happen next. The boy felt it too, but he tried not to think about all the people staring at him. He tried to ignore the director's smirk, the staff members watching with folded arms, and even his mother's worried eyes. He focused only on the piano in front of him. His hands rested gently on the keys. They felt cool and smooth, like they were waking up under his touch. For a moment, he didn't know what note to play first. His heart was beating fast, and he wasn't sure if it was excitement or fear. He swallowed and took another slow breath, the way he always did when he needed to calm his mind. He pressed the first key. A simple, soft sound drifted through the air. It wasn't loud or impressive. It was gentle, like the beginning of a story being whispered. The boy's fingers moved again, pressing another key, and then another. He didn't think about what he was doing. He didn't plan each note. It was as if something inside him guided his hands, showing him where to press, when to move. and how softly to play. People in the hall leaned forward without even realizing it. A few seconds ago, most of them had expected him to hit random notes and then quickly stop. But the sound coming from the piano didn't feel random. Yes, it was simple, but there was a strange sense of flow to it, like the start of a melody forming in the air. The instructor, who had encouraged him earlier, crossed her arms slowly, narrowing her eyes not out of doubt, but out of curiosity. She had seen talented children before, but something about this boy's way of touching the keys felt different. The boy sat as still as a stone, only his fingers moving. He wasn't smiling, but there was a soft calmness in his expression, the kind that appears when someone is doing something they truly love. He played another gentle set of notes, and this time the melody grew slightly clearer. It was nothing complex, but it had a natural rhythm, like water trickling down a stream. The sound spread across the hall, bouncing softly off the tall ceilings and the smooth walls. People began whispering to each other quietly. Wait, does he actually know what he's doing? It doesn't sound bad. It's surprisingly smooth. The director, who had been leaning on one side with his arms crossed, shifted slightly. It was the first small sign that his confidence was fading. Whether he wanted to admit it or not, the boy wasn't just tapping the keys. He was playing, but the hall didn't stay quiet for long. A few students walking down the upper hallway paused when they heard the melody drifting from below. They leaned over the railing, trying to see where the sound was coming from. More footsteps followed. Soon, a group of academy students gathered on the second floor, looking down in disbelief at the small boy sitting at their grand piano. The boy, unaware of the growing crowd, continued playing. His fingers were still shaky, but the melody now had a shape. It gently rose and fell, like it was breathing. He didn't know the names of the notes he played. He didn't know anything about scales or technique. All he knew was the feeling, an old, familiar feeling that came from the same place where he kept his dreams. It was the feeling he had whenever he secretly practiced on the broken keyboard left behind by a neighbor who moved away years ago. That old keyboard had missing buttons, faded letters, and keys that sometimes stuck. But it had given him one precious thing, the confidence to follow the sound inside his mind. As he played, the hall grew unexpectedly still again. People had stopped whispering. Even the students above kept quiet. The boy didn't notice the silence, but he could feel something strange spreading around him, the feeling of people listening. Really listening. His mother, who had been standing a few steps behind him, covered her mouth with her hand. She had never heard him play like this. She had heard him tap the broken keyboard at home, but the sound always felt muted and incomplete. Hearing him now, on a real piano, made her eyes fill with tears. She wasn't sure if it was pride or fear or something in between. Maybe it was everything at once. The instructor stepped a little closer, trying to see his hands more clearly. She watched how his fingers moved awkward at times, unsure in some moments, but every now and then they glided smoothly, naturally, as if he understood the keys in a way that couldn't be taught. She had seen many students train for years without developing that natural softness in their touch, but the director still refused to be impressed. He cleared his throat loudly, trying to regain control of the moment. That's enough, he said, raising his hand. He's just pressing whatever comes to his mind. There's no structure, no technique. Let's not pretend otherwise. The boy heard his voice, but he didn't stop. The melody had finally reached a point where it made sense to him, and he didn't want to break it. This time, when he played a higher note, it rang brighter than the others. One of the students above accidentally gasped at the sound, earning a quick look from her classmate. The director frowned and stepped forward. I said that's enough. But the instructor lifted her hand gently, stopping him. Let him finish, she said quietly. For a moment. Her voice was soft but firm, and the director hesitated. He didn't like losing authority, especially not in front of his staff and students. But something in the room made it difficult to argue. Maybe it was the music. Maybe it was the silent attention from the people above. Or maybe it was the strange truth he didn't want to face. The boy was not playing randomly. He was creating something. The boy lowered his head slightly as his fingers moved toward a softer ending. His melody slowed down as if he was slowly closing a long, gentle story. The final note he pressed lingered in the air for a second, ringing delicately before fading away. When the sound disappeared, no one moved at first. The boy lifted his hands off the keys and placed them in his lap. His breathing was uneven, and his shoulders were tense. He didn't know if he had played well. He didn't know what anyone thought. He only knew that he had finally felt alive for a few seconds. Then a small sound came from the second floor, one pair of hands clapping softly. It was hesitant, like the person wasn't sure if they should clap or stay silent. But the clap echoed in the quiet hall, and it drew everyone's attention. The director turned sharply, glaring upward, but it was too late. Another pair of hands began clapping. Then another. Soon the entire upper floor was filled with gentle applause. Not loud, not flashy, but honest. The boy looked up, surprised. He had never been applauded before. Not once in his life. He had never been in a room full of people who listened to him, let alone clapped for him. The director looked furious, but he forced a stiff smile, pretending he wasn't shaken. "Very well," he said loudly, raising his chin. "He has enthusiasm. But this doesn't prove anything." The instructor didn't respond. She stepped closer to the piano and knelt slightly, so she was at the boy's eye level. "How did you learn to play?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. The boy looked down at his hands. "I don't know," he whispered. "I just hear it. And then I try to play what I hear." The mother, still emotional, whispered, "He never had lessons. He teaches himself." The instructor nodded slowly, studying the boy as if she was looking at something rare, something precious. Before she could say more, the director clapped his hands together sharply. "All right, everyone. That's enough excitement for the morning. Let's get back to our work." The students reluctantly began walking away, but their eyes stayed on the boy for as long as possible. The staff members dispersed too, though a few of them still glanced back, unable to forget what they had heard. The director turned and began walking toward his office, acting as if nothing special had happened. But the instructor remained by the boy's side. She watched him run his fingers over the keys again, almost absent-mindedly. Something had started today, something none of them were ready for, something the boy himself didn't fully understand. The challenge the director had made earlier echoed faintly in the hall, like a forgotten promise waiting to return. If he can play anything worth hearing, I'll resign my job. No one knew it yet. But the boy had just taken the first step toward changing much more than anyone expected. The hall slowly emptied after the boy finished playing, but the echo of his melody stayed behind like a faint shadow refusing to leave. Even the boy, who sat quietly on the piano bench with his hands resting on his knees, could still hear the last note humming inside his head. It felt unreal. He had never played in front of so many people. He had never felt a room go silent just because of something he did. And he had never seen applause directed at him. Not once in his life. His mother walked over with unsure steps. She wasn't angry. She wasn't scolding him. She simply looked overwhelmed. She kept touching the corners of her eyes as if trying to wipe away tears she didn't want anyone to notice. She placed her hand on her son's shoulder, gently guiding him up from the bench. "You should have told me you could play like that," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "I didn't know I could," the boy said softly. The instructor who had defended him stood nearby. still watching him with a thoughtful expression. She didn't rush to speak. She simply observed him the way a person might look at a door that had suddenly opened to a new hallway they never expected to find. After a quiet moment, she gently said, "You have something special inside you." The boy didn't know how to respond. He lowered his gaze again. His mother bowed her head politely. "Thank you for letting him play. I'm sorry for any trouble." But the instructor shook her head. He created no trouble. He revealed talent. The boy's mother tried to smile, but she was too overwhelmed. She softly thanked her again and took the boy by the hand. They started walking toward the corridor where she kept her cleaning supplies, leaving the instructor behind with a thoughtful look on her face. She turned and glanced toward the director's office. His door was slightly open. She could see him pacing inside, rubbing his forehead as if dealing with a problem that refused to disappear. She sighed, knowing he would not let go of his pride easily. Inside his office, the director muttered to himself, replaying the scene again and again. He refused to admit the boy had played well. He convinced himself the crowd was simply reacting to the novelty of a child at the piano. That must be it. He couldn't allow himself to believe anything else, because if he did, he would have to acknowledge that his bold, arrogant statement was no longer a joke. If he can play anything worth hearing, "I'll resign my job." The words returned to him like a quiet threat. He shook his head and slammed his palm lightly on the table. It was luck. Nothing more. There was no structure, no discipline. This academy values skill, not luck. But even as he said it, he remembered the boy's expression while playing, the calmness, the focus, the softness in his touch. He remembered the silence that followed the final note. It hadn't been forced or planned. People had been genuinely moved. And that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Meanwhile, the boy and his mother walked through the side hallway. She stopped at a corner where the cleaning cart stood parked against a wall. She knelt down in front of him. "You shouldn't ask to touch expensive things," she said gently. "But I didn't know you had this in you. How did you learn?" The boy shrugged slowly. "I just listen. I hear songs in my head, and I try to play them." "But who taught you?" She pressed softly. "No one," he whispered. "I just learned on that broken keyboard. The one near the old window." Her eyes softened even more. That broken keyboard had been lying around for years. She had always assumed her son only played with the few working buttons to pass time. She didn't know he was teaching himself real melodies, the kind that could make even trained students stop and listen. She ran her fingers through his hair. "You surprised me today." The boy looked up with shy eyes. "Did I do something wrong?" She shook her head quickly. "No, you didn't do anything wrong. You just amazed everyone." For a moment, the boy felt a warm feeling rise inside him. It wasn't pride. It wasn't excitement. It was something deeper, something like hope. A feeling he didn't know he had been missing. Before his mother could say more, the instructor approached quietly. She spoke politely so the mother wouldn't feel embarrassed. "I'd like to talk to both of you for a moment, if you don't mind." The mother nodded nervously. "We have many students here," the instructor began. "Some of them practice for hours every day. Some train for years. But your son, he played with a natural feeling many of them never develop." The mother swallowed hard. "I don't know anything about music. I don't even know how to help him." "That's all right," the instructor said. "Some talents grow even without guidance. But with the right help, they can become something extraordinary." The boy felt his heart thump faster. He never thought anyone would say words like these about him. He had always been the child who had to stand aside while others practiced. The child who didn't belong in places like this. The instructor turned to him. "Would you like to learn properly? With a real teacher? The boy's lips parted, but he couldn't speak. The idea felt too big, too bright. Before he could answer, the mother spoke. "I can't afford lessons here," she said softly. "We barely manage as it is." The instructor gave a small, patient smile. "I know. That's why I'm asking the director to consider giving him a chance. A trial. Let him show what he can do." The mother's eyes widened. He would never agree. "Let me try," the instructor said. "No promises, but I will try." She placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Keep your heart open. This morning was just the beginning." With that, she stepped back and walked toward the director's office. The mother and boy watched her disappear behind the large door. Inside the director's office, the instructor knocked lightly and walked in. The director looked irritated, but didn't stop her. "I assume this is about the boy," he said sharply. "Yes," she replied calmly. "He has potential." "He played a few soft notes," the director snapped. "Children press random keys all the time." "That wasn't random," she said firmly. "He has natural musical memory, and his ear for tone is better than many first-year students." The director rolled his eyes. "Please don't exaggerate." "I'm not," she said. "You know, I don't say such things lightly." The director sighed loudly, folding his arms. "We cannot just hand out opportunities to anyone who walks through the door. This academy is built on discipline. And talent," she added. "You know that." He looked away. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Why are you resisting this so strongly? Are you scared?" The director's eyes snapped toward her in annoyance. "I am not scared." "Then let him try," she said. "If he fails, I will accept your judgment. But if he succeeds?" The director narrowed his eyes. "If he succeeds, then what?" "You know the answer," she said quietly. "Your own words." "I didn't speak them." He stiffened. The memory of his bold statement returned again, like a cold wind dot, if he can play anything worth hearing. "I'll resign my job." The instructor watched his expression change. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he turned his chair slightly away, staring at the window. "This is nonsense," he muttered. "This boy, he cannot possibly." But he couldn't fully convince himself anymore. The image of the boy sitting at the piano kept returning to his mind. The innocence, the focus, the music that came without hesitation. The instructor spoke softly. "Great talent never walks in wearing fancy clothes. Sometimes it enters quietly, wearing dust from a mother's work shift." The director didn't respond. She walked toward the door, opened it, and then paused. "Think carefully," she said, "because that boy may be more than a moment of surprise. He might be something that changes the story of this academy forever." She left the room. The director sat alone, staring at nothing, the room silent except for the fading echo of a melody he wished he could forget, but COULDN single quotes T. Meanwhile. In the hallway, the boy stood silently by his mother's side. He didn't understand everything that was happening, but he could sense something growing inside him, something like a door opening to a world he never knew he was allowed to enter. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing. This morning had not been a mistake, that it was the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. Here is part 4 of your story, written in simple, natural English and crafted to stay engaging and human-centric. The moment the hall fell silent, he felt it in his chest. It wasn't fear this time. It wasn't doubt either. It was something new, something he had never felt before. It was as if every sound that had once scared him, every whisper that used to shake him, had suddenly melted away. Now there was only stillness, a calm stillness, the kind that comes when a person finally stands where they were always meant to be. He didn't move right away. His fingers hovered above the keys, barely touching them. The lights from above warmed the top of his hands, making his skin look lighter, almost glowing. He could hear his own breathing. He could hear the breathing of the crowd, too. They were awaiting Dot, and for the first time, they were waiting for him. He took in a slow breath and lowered his fingers to the keys. The piano was old, but the keys felt different now, like they were no longer resisting him. As if they finally trusted him. As if they finally wanted him there. Then he played. The first note was soft, but it carried all the way to the back of the hall. The sound echoed gently, like a drop of water falling in a quiet room. He didn't rush. He let the sound fade naturally. When he pressed the second note, it blended with the first so smoothly that someone who didn't know music might think the piano was breathing. People leaned forward in their seats. Some clasped their hands together. Others widened their eyes, wondering how a boy they had laughed at, a boy they had nearly pushed aside, could play like that. But he didn't see any of them. He didn't want to. His mind drifted somewhere else, somewhere warm. He could almost hear his mother humming in the tiny room they shared. He remembered watching her cook while tapping her fingers on the counter, always in a rhythm he didn't understand then. He remembered how she smiled whenever she heard a distant piano playing from the neighbor's radio. She always said music made the world softer. Now he understood what she meant. He kept playing. His hands were moving faster now, his fingers dancing across the keys, like they had a life of their own. Each note came out stronger, sweeter, clearer. It was as if he wasn't even thinking anymore. The music just rose from his chest, passed through his arms, and poured out of his fingertips. He didn't have a sheet. He didn't have a plan. He didn't even know what this piece was called. It wasn't something he had practiced. It wasn't something someone taught him. It was something he carried inside for years without knowing it. The melody changed suddenly, becoming brighter. A few people in the audience gasped quietly. Someone whispered, "How is he doing that?" The director, who had laughed earlier, stood frozen near the back. He didn't blink. His lips were parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't. The boy had proved him wrong with a single touch, and now he was proving him wrong with every note that followed. The boy shifted the melody again, taking the room through waves of gentle sound. It felt like a story with highs and lows, with moments of hope and moments of longing. People didn't know why, but the music made them feel something deep in their chests, something warm and familiar. In the second row, an elderly man wiped the corner of his eye. Nearby, a woman reached for a tissue without looking away from the stage. Even the young children in the audience were quiet, almost afraid to move. And the boy did something unexpected. He lifted both hands off the piano for a second, a full second. The silence stunned everyone. They thought he was done, but then his hands came down again, this time with a new burst of energy. The hall filled with a powerful sound, rich and full. He played faster than before, but not in a way that felt rushed. Every movement had purpose. Every note had meaning. It was passion, not panic. Control, not chaos. Some audience members rose from their seats without even realizing it, drawn by the intensity. They watched as the boy leaned into the piano, fully absorbed in the moment. His eyes were half closed, his expression calm yet focused. The director pressed his palm against the wall to steady himself. He whispered something under his breath, but no one heard him clearly. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was regret. The boy kept playing. At one point, he hit a strong chord so suddenly that it felt like the whole room shook. People inhaled sharply. He followed it with a soft, delicate run of notes, like the sound of rain hitting windows late at night. The contrast was beautiful. It made the hall feel alive. As the piece neared its end, the music softened again. His fingers slowed. The notes became spaced out, like footsteps walking away down a quiet hallway. Each sound floated upward and disappeared into the silence above. He felt something rise in his throat, not sadness, not fear, something else. He took another slow breath as his hands reached the final part. He pressed the last 3 notes one by one. The final note lingered in the air longer than the others. It hung there, suspended in the stillness, like a small light refusing to go out. The boy lifted his hand slowly, letting the sound fade naturally. When the piano finally went quiet, the silence was so deep it almost felt like a sound itself. He kept his eyes on the keys. He didn't want to look up. He wasn't ready to see what the people thought. He wasn't ready to face the director. He wasn't even sure he wanted applause. He just wanted to breathe. But then he heard something. One person clapped dot, just one dot. It was a soft clap. Hesitant, unsure. Then another joined, dot, then another. Within seconds, the hall erupted into applause so loud it echoed off the walls. People stood from their seats. Some cheered, some whistled. Some shouted words he couldn't understand because the room had become a storm of voices and sound. The boy finally lifted his head. What he saw made his heart skip. Everyone was standing. Every single person, even the director. The man who had laughed. The man who had doubted him. The man who had said he didn't belong anywhere near the piano was standing, clapping slowly with a stunned expression, as if he had just witnessed something he never expected. The boy didn't smile. He didn't cry. He didn't bow. He just stared at them, all of them, trying to understand if this was real. For a brief moment, he felt weightless, like the whole world had lifted off his shoulders, like the years of silence, the years of being ignored, the years of wishing for something he couldn't reach, had all led to this single moment. People continued clapping. Some even moved closer to the stage. A few called out asking his name, wanting to know who he was, where he had learned to play, how he had done something so extraordinary. But he didn't answer. He simply placed his hands on his lap and closed his eyes for a moment, letting the applause wash over him. This was his moment, a moment he never asked for, never expected, but truly deserved. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The hall remained silent for a long moment after the boy finished playing, as if everyone needed time to catch their breath. The music he had played was still echoing inside their minds, filling the room with a quiet kind of magic. Even the people who had mocked him earlier seemed unsure of what to say now. They looked at him differently, not as the quiet boy who didn't belong, but as someone who had just changed the air around them. The boy sat still on the piano bench, his small hands resting softly on his lap. He didn't look proud or nervous. He looked almost relieved, as if he had finally been allowed to say something he had been carrying inside for a long time. His mother stood near the entrance, both hands covering her mouth. Tears ran down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were the kind that came when someone saw a dream they never dared to believe finally stepping into the light. The director stood in the center of the hall, frozen in place. His face had gone from red to pale in a matter of seconds. He had not expected this. He had not expected the boy to touch the piano with such confidence, and he definitely didn't expect music like that to come from someone who had never studied at the academy. For the first time that day, he had nothing clever or sarcastic to say. His pride had been pushed aside by something stronger. Realization. Slowly, people in the hall began to whisper. Some teachers exchanged looks of disbelief. A few students couldn't stop smiling. One of them even clapped a little before stopping, unsure if it was the right moment. But no one laughed anymore. Not a single person was amused. Instead, they were amazed, surprised, and even a little humbled. The director finally cleared his throat and walked toward the boy. His steps were slow, not because he was hesitant, but because he wasn't sure what to say. He looked around the room and saw everyone watching him, waiting for his reaction. They hadn't forgotten his challenge. They remembered every word he had said earlier, the bold, arrogant promise he had made without thinking. If he can play anything worth hearing, I'll resign my job. That was what he had declared. And now, the boy had played something far beyond worth hearing. He stopped a few steps away from the piano, and for a moment, he just stared at the floor. It was not a typical thing for him. He was a man used to speaking loudly, commanding attention. But now he looked like someone who had been pushed into a corner by his own words. The boy looked up at him, not challenging, not expecting, just waiting. The director sighed softly and finally spoke, his voice much calmer than anyone expected. "You surprised all of us," he said, "including me." He paused a moment. "I shouldn't have spoken the way I did earlier." His words settled in the air, honest and clear. Some people nodded. Others simply listened. The boy's mother stepped forward slowly, still wiping tears from her eyes. She looked nervous, unsure of what would happen next. She didn't want the director's job. She didn't want trouble. All she wanted was for her son to be treated kindly, to be given a chance. The director noticed her standing there, and he turned toward her. "I owe you an apology," he said, "both of you." She shook her head quickly, as if refusing it. "You don't owe me anything," she said in a shaky voice. "My boy just loves music." "Yes," the director replied softly. "That is very clear now." Then he looked at the boy again, really looked at him. The calmness in the boy's eyes, the talent he had shown without hesitation, the honesty in every note he played, it all made the director feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Respect. He took a deep breath and stepped closer. "What you did today," he said, "is something even some of our trained students can't do. You played from your heart. And that is something no school can teach." The boy lowered his eyes shyly, unsure of how to react to such praise. The director glanced at the gathered teachers, then back at the boy. "We cannot ignore talent like yours," he said. "And I don't want to." Everyone watched closely as he continued, "So I'd like to make an announcement." The room fell perfectly silent again. The director stood tall and said, "This boy will be given a full scholarship at this academy, starting immediately." Gasps filled the hall. Some teachers smiled proudly. A few students looked stunned but impressed. The boy's mother covered her face again as more tears flowed, but this time her shoulders shook with relief and happiness. The boy blinked up at the director. He understood what a scholarship meant, even if he didn't know every detail. It meant he could play. It meant he could learn properly. It meant doors were opening, doors that had been locked his whole life. Then something even more unexpected happened. The director placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "And I will personally guide your training." People murmured again. The same man who had mocked the boy earlier was now offering to teach him himself. It wasn't because he wanted to fix his reputation. It wasn't because he had been pressured. It was because he had seen something so real, so powerful, that it changed him. But the director wasn't done. He turned toward the crowd and said, "As for my earlier words, I spoke too quickly. I shouldn't have made such a promise. The truth is, if I resigned now, I would only be running away from my own mistake. And I want to do better instead." He paused. "So no, I'm not resigning, but I am changing, starting today." Surprisingly, the hall filled with soft applause, not mocking, not forced, just genuine acceptance. The boy's mother approached her son slowly, almost in disbelief. She placed her arm around him and held him close. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. He leaned into her, quiet and still overwhelmed. Some of the teachers approached too. One of them asked him what piece he had played. The boy simply shrugged and said, "I just played what I felt." That answer made everyone smile. As people began to leave the hall, some students walked by the boy and greeted him kindly. A few even asked if he could show them how he played that beautiful melody one day. The boy nodded shyly. The director stayed for a moment longer, standing beside the piano and watching the boy and his mother walk out together. Something inside him softened. He realized that sometimes talent grows in places he never expects. Sometimes brilliance shines from those who have the least. And sometimes, he thought, a simple moment like a boy touching a piano can change the heart of an entire room. The day ended with the boy and his mother stepping outside into the soft afternoon light. She walked slowly, still overwhelmed, while he walked a little faster, filled with quiet joy. He looked back at the academy once, holding the moment close inside his heart. He had played. They had listened. And now, his real journey was just beginning.